Now we got, in fact, to the bottom of page 3, and there are just 2 comments I want to make on the remainder of page 3, which is, first of all, with respect to the and segments. In English, these would usually be produced with a certain amount of lip rounding, not very strong lip rounding. So in many languages in the world and in Europe, the shut, the sound, for example, in ship, as I'm doing it, would be produced as ship, with strong rounding and protrusion. So in English, we must have a relative relaxation. But a little rounding is better. So the S sound, as in sip, would have no rounding, and in ship would have some. So if your language doesn't happily distinguish between sup and shut, then this is one way in which you can make that difference clear. The other point was in the resonance, and this is in the resonant frequency. So that in English, there is a sort of nibbling frequency. If I make it lower, trip, that's very typical of many languages. That would be wrong for English. Similarly, if I raise the resonant frequency, shit, or shot, then that is similarly untypical for English. And so, as in most pronunciations in English, for the consonants, we're aiming at a sort of middling kind of quality, not too far forward and not too far back. Moving now very quickly just to clear up the bottom of the page where we have H, and what I've said here is that H is actually a very brief realization of the following vowel. And if the H is realized without raising, then we have, in other words, if we take the phoneme H and we realize it, then every occurrence of that H must be followed by a vowel, and every occurrence of the H is different depending on the quality of the vowel. So we can always tell which vowel is going to follow by the lip shape and the resonance of the H in question. So if I have H plus R, then the H is really what we're saying is that we have that kind of suffix. Now, the fricative noise here is coming partly from the glottis and partly from the general resonance up in the oral cavity. Where it is not coming from is the back of the tongue and the velar. So if I were to say hard, that would not be a possible realization for the English H. So we must think of it as a whispered vowel. Hard. And everybody can whisper, of course. That's not a very sophisticated phonetic operation. So practice whispering the first bit of the vowel. Exaggerate it, first of all. Hard. But then practice making the whispered bit shorter and the voiced bit longer. But don't make a stricture in the oral cavity other than one appropriate to the vowel. So if I take the words had, you can tell which vowel is coming next. just by the shape of H. So if I don't make any sound, you can tell that the vowel's coming next, I hope. Suppose I said, what would be next? Oh. Right, okay, so maybe something like hord or hod or something like that. That relatively open vowel with rounding and so on. So this is always predictable. No, I won't go into that because we won't have time otherwise to go into more practice, and in fact your practical class is where that sort of operation should be worked. So let's go over the page now and have a look at the liquids. And as I said yesterday, the liquids constitute the approximate category along with yod and w, which are the semi-vowel subdivisions. Now all of the approximates have the feature that they are usually voiced and usually have no major stricture. So sometimes we have exceptions to that, but those exceptions are relatively rare, and we can easily specify when they occur by writing simple rules. So the exceptions are easily covered. So let's have a look then, first of all, at the phoneme R, as in paragraph 2 on page 4. First of all, realizations of R, I should specify here phonetically, just to remind you that the first bracket contains that symbol, which is just an upside down R, and if you remember from yesterday, that is a voiced post-alveolar approximant. Okay, so the tip of the tongue is articulating in the general area of that location of the roof of the mouth, but not actually touching it. Okay, so this is red, 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 ara, 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 and there must be no contact at all. No friction, of course. In the next bracket we have the same symbol with that diacritic, and this would be sha, 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 which is never used on its own in English, only after a T, as in trade. So I can turn red with an approximant, non-fricative realization into trade by taking away the voicing and adding some friction. So that is both voiceless and with friction, as in trade or try. Sometimes we have the same realization after P and K. So cry, try, and pry too does happen sometimes. The next realization has a different diacritic, which is that, and it may not be very clear, so if I do it very large over there, the principle is that the symbol indicates that the realization of that symbol above it is produced more closely, or with a closer stricture, a higher stricture in the mouth than would be the case if there were no diacritic. So if I add that diacritic to an approximant, i.e. with no friction, then obviously if I make it a bit closer, a stronger stricture, then I'm going to get friction. And we keep the voicing here, so we have the sound ja, ja, as in re, re, and jan, except that neither of that pronunciation, neither of those words was correctly pronounced in English, because we don't use that kind of R. We don't say red, red, and jan. We would only use this one after a D. So dry and then drip. That would be okay, but jan is not possible. The third symbol, to make this perfectly clear, is this one, and this is what we call an alveolar tap. Okay, so it's alveolar form. And it's voiced, so it's plus voice, alveolar, and it's tap. Or some people call it, and this is a sound ara, 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 which is nowadays not used in RP. So it used to be used between vowels, particularly, not so much in words like ram and red, but very and horrible and terrible and so on and so forth in that kind of context. Now that sort of RP is very old-fashioned. Unfortunately for speakers of languages where the ra sound occurs, unfortunately now you can't do it anymore because it would now sound very, very old-fashioned, or some English regions produce it still. You also hear it when people are singing, or sometimes on the stage too, particularly in Shakespearean and other performances where maybe that kind of R was more, certainly would have been more common. So this is the only time when we would use it. So, obviously here, the object of our attention must be the most common sound, which is this one. And here we must note that we can have a little lip rounding, as in red, 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 run. It is the opinion of some people that if you have too much lip rounding, red, red, run, you are speaking in a vulgar fashion. Well, I don't want to give value judgments in that respect. It's not my adjective to describe people as vulgar, but this is an opinion in the phonetics and English teaching world. So try not to get too much rounding for r, but some is preferable, and it does help to distinguish from the L sound, of course, for those speakers of languages where r and l are not happily and readily distinguished. So a little lip rounding will give a clue to what's going on. Now, the vocalic resonance of this, as in most English consonants, as I've said, is basically a schwa. In other words, it's that. So we would expect here to have, if we have the word red, then a pronunciation like that would be better if I said red, red. I could add a diacritic here, which is the mark of non-syllabic vowel. Right? So when we're thinking very carefully about pronunciation, we can distinguish between vowels which are syllabic, vowels which are not. So all vowels are assumed to be syllabic unless we add that little sort of dish over the top of them, and then they aren't anymore. So this is not two syllables, ed, but only one, ed, 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 ed. Now, ed. And if you round your lips a little bit, then that's going to produce a reasonable realization for the English R. Other realizations for R, which would sound pretty awful, would be red, looking at the brackets now in section B. First of the brackets has the tap, red. Second bracket has a trill, red, red, which sounds very, well, dramatic, theatrical, not English really at all, not RP anyway. Then we have the voiced fricative, jed, 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 which is also wrong. Then we have, which is perhaps not all that clear, it's an upside down capital R. This is a voiced uvular fricative, red, 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 So whether we produce friction, lead, or an approximant by opening the stricture a bit, reversing that little diacritic therefore, turning into lead. So say not lead, but lead, with a uvular articulation. This is equally wrong. So all of those pronunciations are not acceptable for English, and certainly not the last example here, which has simply the sound L. So lead is not ever going to be right for the English word red. Red. Okay, so the schwa sound then is important. And it's a good idea. I think sometimes if people were teaching English from the very beginning, it might be a good idea not to associate the students with the letter R if you operate in a language which has the same Roman alphabet. Once you start associating with the letter R, then the student has in their mind all of the associations with possible R sounds in that language. And you've got to counteract a lot of sort of inertia on the part of the student, which is very difficult to do. Now, what one could do, I think, in teaching from the very beginning, and what we're trying to do remedially, is to substitute a different set of associations. So we don't think of R as consonant, but as a kind of vowel. Okay, as a kind of schwa, with a bit of lip rounding. So, bre. That's not quite right for most people, but it's quite right for a lot of people in English, and it's very close to the correct version. There's not far to go to get to the usual majority pattern. Okay, now going down paragraph 3 here, and we note that I am using the term rhotic and non-rhotic. Just to remind you, I'm sure that John Wells would have mentioned this at the beginning, where RP is one of the English accents where R doesn't occur other than before a vowel or sometimes a syllabic consonant. So R plus a consonant in RP is not possible. Therefore, in words where R is spelt, as in plant, we must of course have no sound in the pronunciation. So if you said farm, that would be fine for lots of English regional accents and most Americans, but it wouldn't be right for RP. So not farm with that realized, but so we mustn't have the sound there. Sometimes the R does get to be syllabic, and in the word temporary, I think in my pronunciation I would make that a 4-syllable word. I think I'd have this. And one pronunciation, a more relaxed, quicker pronunciation would be temporary, which is 3 syllables, temporary, okay? But I could say temporary, and I'm making that here syllabic. So I'm doing that there and also here, temporary. So that is a possibility, but that's pretty rare, and not everybody perhaps would do it. Okay, now going over the page now to the top, I've exhausted all the things that I felt necessary, vital to say about R, but of course practice of this sound is absolutely vital on the right basis, and that's what the practical classes pronunciation will set out to do. So let's have a look then at the L at the top of the next page, and we have to make the observation that all L sounds in RP are what we call lateral, which means that all the other sounds of RP except this one are median. So median means with the air escaping over the centre of the tongue through the mouth. It may go out through the nose too, okay, but median then describes all the other sounds. So obviously we've only got one which is lateral and all the others are median, then we don't waste our breath saying median for all the others. We merely point out that there is one which is an exception, and this is a lateral. So if we have a look at what is meant by lateral, if we can imagine ourselves looking over on the roof of the mouth, we look down through here, okay, onto the top of my tongue. If I'm making a D sound, let's say, then the area of contact with the tongue and the roof of the mouth would be shown in this way. Okay? So this means that there is a complete seal by the tongue against the roof of the mouth for D, because remember, we must close the oral cavity completely. So not just with the tip and blade of the tongue there, but the sides too. Otherwise the air leaks out over the side and we don't get a proper D. So we can turn a D into an L very easily by maintaining that closure. Okay, so we have a medial occlusion for the lateral, and then we have the escape of air on usually one side of the tongue. Doesn't matter, of course, which side, doesn't matter if it's both sides. People vary in this, but there must be a common factor of a closure here and the release of the air over one side of both sides of the tongue. So the air comes So D is different from L than in this way. Now, this is a major difference, of course, between R and L, because in the case of R, we don't have any contact at all, whereas in L, we have a very positive contact. Similarly, with L, we don't have any lip rounding, whereas in R, we can have some. And so there are numerous differences between the sounds in articulation which we can concentrate on if we need to. So, looking at very briefly, paragraph 7 now, we have the observation that the M and N and Eng nasals are produced long at the ends of words. This is an observation which is usually not given. Okay? There's a major difference between English and most other languages in that we expect these three nasals to be long at the ends of words. Therefore, they are subject to clipping if they're followed by a fortis obstruent or a voiceless obstruent. Okay, as we were talking about yesterday, using the term obstruent. So, in other words, if I put a voiceless stop at the end of the word tran, that's a long N, then I get tran. And I show that there's the presence of a voiceless obstruent here, obviously a plosive, because no air comes out after the sound, but I show that it's voiceless and etc. by virtue of the clipping, both in the vowel a and in the n sound. So no longer tran, but tran. All right? So we don't have to release the P audibly. We don't have to tramp in order to know that it's a P there, because that is shown by the clipping of the sounds before. So those of you who don't hear a P in the English pronunciation of that, tramp, 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 all right? We have the, excuse me, the expectation that in English we don't have the expectation of releasing the P audibly, because the presence of it is already shown by clipping, tramp. And if we don't have clipping, tran, and there's no clipping of and, no clipping of nasal, then there is no P. So we already have adequate information. Now, what I'm saying here for the nasals then is also true for the final L. Remember that in RP, all realizations of the lateral phoneme must actually be with a medium occlusion and a lateral escape. So in a word like fell, we have a long L, fell, and felled, similarly long because of the D, which is voiced. So fell, felled, felt, and then if there's a T, felt, 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 then the L is clipped. So fell, fell, felt, felt, felt. And other instances too, which we don't need to go into now because that would anticipate another lecture which you'll get next week. So I don't want to jump the gun too much on the detail of that later lecture. Let's go now to section 8 on page 5, where we have the subdivisions of the L into two major groups, which are shown as clear and dark. And these are legitimate terms, so long, legitimate abbreviations, so long as you know what they're short for. So the clear L is simply one with the basic English expected consonantal resonance, which would be a schwa. All right, okay. And the velarized L, or the dark L, is short for velarized, which means that there are two things going on in the mouth at the same time. If we have a clear L, then we would have something of that tongue shape where there is closure there. Okay, so we have a closure here for a clear L, but for dark L, we would have not this kind of shape, but where the tongue is a bit of a lumpy roof of the mouth, forgive me for that. The back of the tongue here is approximating with the soft palate. So we have an approximation of a velar character, hence velarization. Now, the point of the suffix, why we call it velarized and not velar, is because a velar articulation would place it on the same level of stricture as the other articulation present in the mouth. So if we have two articulations at the same time in the mouth, which is very common, then they can be of equal status. They can be of equal closure, let's say. So we could have an alveolar closure and a velar closure, but that wouldn't be velarized. So the ization affix means that it's a weaker stricture than the other stricture with which it coexists. So they're both at the same time then, contemporary, simultaneous, and this is the closure and then the approximation here. Now what we're actually doing is producing a kind of back vowel. So some notations of the dark L would give us the information that we have a back vowel of an unrounded character. So it's something like, which are taken from the cardinal vowel chart, something like, well, so tell, so not tell or tell with a schwa, tell, but tell, which is relatively close. Okay, so with a back. Now, if we have an approximation here, then the obvious implication of that approximation is that it is a matter of degree, because we could obviously control the distance of the back of the tongue from the soft palate, and we could make a closer or a more open vowel. And we have to be rather careful, because in many languages a velarized lateral occurs, but the degree of velarization is often too much for English. So in the case of Russian speakers, for example, Portuguese speakers, Dutch speakers, they tend to say things like tell, and that is too velarized. So they're still doing the same velarization, but they're making a very close approximation up to there, whereas an English approximation would be weaker than that. So we don't want to go higher than this vowel, maybe more open even than that kind of vowel. So it's something like tell, or. So it's something like vowel or, with the L rather than a closer vowel. So not all, tell. Now, for those people who can't do dark L, remember that we have to aim for the simultaneous pronunciation of a normal lateral. So the dark L and the clear L are simply alveolar sounds, so we don't change the position of the tip and the blade of the tongue. Now again, many foreign speakers have been taught that you curl the tip of your tongue back in order to get the dark L, and you don't. What you get if you curl the tip of your tongue back is a retroflex sound, which I'll be talking about perhaps next Friday in the final 9 o'clock lecture. So you get terry, which doesn't sound remotely like a dark L to a native English speaker. Just sounds like a different kind of foreign L. So if you say tell, that's wrong for RP. Terry, similarly wrong, but in a different way. So to be wrong in a different way doesn't make it English. It's no advance at all. So resist that kind of teaching. I hope that all the teachers who were telling people to do that have now retired. But if they haven't, then be careful of that. Good. Okay, now looking at the distribution of the clear and dark L, in paragraph 9 here, we have the comment that the L has a distribution which is not of what I call a phonetic process. In other words, the distribution of clear and dark L can't be described in logical, general linguistic terms, because in general linguistics we discover that if you have an L before a front vowel, then you have a clear L. Okay, so this is clear. If you have L plus a back vowel, then this is dark. So this would be the situation in languages generally. I think there might be accents of English where it's true. It's not true for RP. So don't put this down as RP. But this would be true for the Turkic languages, for example, and for the Slavonic languages too. And I think many other languages where L plus a vowel is possible and there is a difference in resonance. Now, that is a natural situation. And that's what we would expect to happen in English, but none of it is true for RP, because in RP we have the clear L plus a yod or plus a vowel. So if we have the word, for example, will, and the dark L elsewhere, so that's in the handout already, so I don't need to put that again. But if we have, for example, the word will, then if we're just looking at the general fact that it's an L, then here that has got to be a dark L because it's followed by nothing. Therefore, it's not followed by vowel, not followed by yod, so a dark L has got to be present. But if I follow this word will with the word you, or I follow it with a yod in the same word, as in William, then the dark L is not possible in RP, and therefore that must be produced as clear. So will you, or William. Okay? So whether it's within the same word or across word boundaries, the same principle applies. A dark L here, call, if I said something like call, then this is a dark L. If I say call them, still dark L because it's followed by a consonant. If I said call all of them, call all of them, call all of them with all, then this would be clear. So call all of them. If I have that. So the word call and all would have velarized L's in isolation, but they have the clear L when they're followed by words beginning with vowel or anything with a yod. So this is the distribution in RP, and as I've said, it's not a very logical one as far as the front or back vowels are concerned. It is phonetically explicable in the case of a yod, because yod is palatal, and therefore palatal means front, and front means like front vowels, E, and so on. So in that context, it is explicable phonetically. But the vowel distribution is not explicable in general linguistic terms. Now, just moving down to the paragraph 10. And paragraph 10, in fact, will be our last one. I would like to offer perhaps a little help for people who have problems with producing dark L. And just to say that in the case of many regional speakers, and possibly one day in RP, because RP is changing to a very great deal, and many of the pronunciations which would not have been acceptable as RP when I first started teaching on this series of summer courses, for example, there were pronunciations then which I would have told you were not correct for RP. They were only okay for certain dialects. But RP has changed to the extent that it let in lots of pronunciations previously excluded. One of the pronunciations is the form of the T in words like that. where we have cotton, cotton. And now our beat speakers very often would produce a glottal stop here instead of T. And you hear cotton, cotton. So if it's before a consonant, it's okay. It's still not okay in RP to say not better, but better. So glottal stop between vowels is still out for RP, quite definitely. But before a consonant, or at the end of a word, then the T realised as a glottal stop, simply nothing else is perfectly okay now, although it used not to be. And so on, and many cases of that type. Now, this is still not in RP, but marginally so, I think. In other words, in another 10 years or another 20 years, we might be reversing the situation and saying it's now acceptable in RP, but it used not to be. This is the pronunciation where the dark L is realised as a vowel. In other words, it is vocalised. So non-RP speakers would turn the tell, for example, and this is very, very common. That's why I think it will get into RP, because a very large number of accents of English, apart from RP, actually do this. So tell is produced as something like tell. One syllable word, tell, tell, tell. Or a vowel of that general character. So now this is an important point, because it is better from the pragmatic point of view, it's better for the foreign speaker to say tell, right, than tell. Because if you say tell, then English speakers can't always understand you. I'll give you an example now of an old lady some years ago came to me and said she wanted some work on her English pronunciation, which wasn't very good, although she'd lived in this country for a long time. One of the problems, she said, was that she used to go regularly to a country house in Elstead, okay? And every time she got on the bus to buy a ticket there, she said Elstead to Elstead, and they couldn't understand her. Every time for about 15 years, they'd say, what, or excuse me, or pardon, or say it again, or where, or whatever. And this was causing her a lot of anguish, because she said, why can't they understand it? Well, I tried to get her to do a dark L, but she couldn't work out, I couldn't get her to do that, and she couldn't produce it at all. So I said, okay, let us operate fairly unconventionally here. Let's say, try saying here, not L, but she was actually a German native speaker, so I said to her, take your German vowel, make it short, non-syllabic, like that, and say tell, L, 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 and say Elstead, Elstead, Elstead. And she went out of my room, she got very, very doubtful about this, and she went out of my room muttering to herself, Elstead, Elstead. I'm clearly not expecting anything good to come from this. But the next week, she came back and she said, well, it was marvellous, she said, because for the first time, she said, he didn't query, I simply asked for Elstead, and they gave me a ticket straight away to the right place, and she said, but they understood me straight away, she said, although I still don't understand, because I never said L. Well, now what she means is that she didn't say her kind of L, okay? Because her kind of L would have been a clear L in this position, so L-stead. And an English native speaker without experience of foreign pronunciations can't interpret the sequence of vowel plus clear L plus consonant. Okay? If it had been any other thing following the L, that would have been okay. But that sequence plus C as a realised as any consonant except the odd, of course. So this would be here this sequence would be expected to be a dark L, and in that context, an English person doesn't hear an L at all, but because they're listening for velarization. So what they try to do is turn it into that. So they hear something like A-stead, because they think that as it's not velarized, the nearest other thing would be either as a schwa, stead, or A-stead with a diphthong A. So either A or would be their interpretation. So A-stead or stead instead of the place you want it to go. And this I've observed on a number of occasions, for example with the German name Helmut, which is produced by many English speakers when they first hear it as Helmut. They don't hear an L because it's not velarized, therefore it's not a proper L for an English native speaker, therefore it must be something else. And the only other thing it can be is a diphthong. Okay, because it's clearly an approximant, Helmut, and vowels are approximants naturally because they don't have any major stricture. So this explains why we have this problem. And as I said, I can't, in all honour, say to you, go and produce the dark L all the time as a vowel like O, as in tell and L-stead and so on, and say that it is definitely going to be RP. But what I can say from the practical point of view is that if you can't achieve intelligibility by any other means, and if you're not happy about your version of dark L, well then use this in the on the correct occasion, and it will get the point across. So we have to balance the principle and the rigid definition as it stands at present, and the practicality of making yourselves understood. So obviously we tread a line between these two ideals, and I'm not trying to convert you to Cockney speakers surreptitiously, but this is a feature very common in Cockney and the southeast of England, and therefore speakers from this region will expect to have either a dark L or else a vocalized L in this way. So it's up to you to make your best effort in that direction. Good. Now that's it for today. So thank you for your attention, and we will